Hi, I'm Randy Wooden, and welcome to another in our Edge Library series. This time we'll talk about cushions, what they are, why they're important, and also give you some examples because they actually work well during an interview and, for that matter, in everyday conversation. Years ago, I sat through a seminar with a fellow named Rick Wilcoxon, Rick Allen and Associates down in Texas, and he talked about cushions, and I'd always intuitively kind of knew to use them, but I didn't really understand enough of really what they were. I just used it. It just sort of came to me. But he tried to put some definition to it and explain the rationale for a cushion. Now understand, in his job, he's selling sales training, and so very often questions about, well, what's this going to cost my company, and things that are sort of probing questions that you really necessarily don't always want to address right then and there. You at least want to put some space in there, so whether you choose to answer it now or even choose to answer it later, at least you've got to do something to acknowledge the question. And so what Rick used to say, and I would agree, is a cushion is something that you would say or do to show respect for the question, first of all. And respect means I'll get to it. So you're not just totally blowing it off, you're going to address the question. So it shows respect for the question, and it allows the other person to begin to drop their defenses. It essentially says, hey, you're okay, I'm okay, one of those things. And it also gives you a little time to think of what your answer might be. So it's a very effective tool to use in conversation, especially if the question is a little awkward for you. Example, in an interview, you could, if the question is, and I'll make this up as I go, but let's say the question is, so tell me, why have you been out of work for X number of months, or whatever, that sort of thing. You've been out of work for quite a while, I see here. Well, a cushion, instead of just hitting the play button and saying, here's my answer, why don't you say something like, well, that's a question I get from time to time, or I'd have the same question if I were in your shoes, or I've been in your shoes and I've wondered the same thing sometimes when looking at a resume. Let me explain, and then you go into your answer. A cushion could also be used when dealing with the money question. So what do you expect to make in this position? You don't want to come out and give them a specific answer, so you put a little cushion in there and say, well, I'm sure we'll be able to work that out. Certainly look to be compensated based on the level of responsibility and based on my experience. I'm sure we'll be able to work something out, and then change the subject, or perhaps even turn around and ask them what did they have in mind. So a cushion can be used, again, when you're faced with a kind of an awkward question. Just bear in mind two things you probably don't want to say. One is, well, that's a good question, or I'm glad you asked. Because when you think about it, if the question is negative, it's designed to draw something out you don't really want to talk about, or it's going to challenge you, you're not really glad they asked. And you don't want to say, well, that's a good question. Now, on the other hand, let's say, and again, making this up as I go, but let's say you're talking about a project that you've worked on, and you go through a brief explanation about the project and its results and so forth, and maybe you left out an element in there, and the employer says, well, so tell me, did that involve working with people from other nations? Did it involve international travel or anything like that? You could say, well, you know what, I'm glad you asked that because I forgot. See, in that case, by them following up with that question, it actually makes you look good. It benefits you because you do have that in your background. You had just forgotten to mention it. So in that sense, his clarification question is actually to your benefit. And so yes, you could say, well, I'm glad you asked. I'd forgotten to mention that. But as a matter of fact, I did. And then you go on to explain it. And then you could ask a confirmation question, which is, did that address your question? So that's a cushion. It shows respect for the question. It allows the other person to begin to drop their defenses, and it gives you some time to think about what you're going to say. And that's going to wrap it up for this in our Edge Library series, talking about a cushion. What is it? Why is it important? And some examples. I'm Randy Wooden. Thanks for watching.